Hello, my name is Ali. I'm a student of Çankırı Karatekin University, Institute of Social Sciences, and Department of Political Science and International Relations. I have prepared this video for my lesson, International Conflict Analysis and Resolution. The topic of my video is Japan's refugee policy. My advisor teacher, Professor Dr. Özçelik, asked me to prepare this video for my lesson. He wants me to improve myself on making videos about the issues. On this video, I'm going to talk about Japan's refugee policy and especially why Japan accepts so few refugees. As we know, Japan has been criticized for having a strict refugee and immigration policy. According to some Japan, there are places where Japan is right and where Japan is wrong. Whether she is right or not, I'm going to talk more about the reasons. Firstly, who is a refugee? According to the definition of UNHCR, United Nations Refugee Agency, refugees are persons outside their countries of origin who are in need of international protection because of a serious threat to their life, physical integrity, or freedom in their country of origin as a result of persecution, armed conflict, violence, and serious public disorder and civil wars. Currently, there are more than 20 million people around the world seeking for refugee status. Some people mix the term asylum seeker and refugee. Actually, the difference is that an asylum seeker is someone whose claim has not yet been finally decided on by the country in which he or she has submitted. Not every asylum seeker will necessarily ultimately be recognized as a refugee, but every refugee is initially an asylum seeker. We can see many refugee crises in the world after 1900s. One of the biggest refugee crises in our recent history started with the Syrian civil war. More than 6 million Syrians have fled their country to seek refuge. When people realize that they cannot live in a peace and secure in their own country, they migrate to other countries. These migrations first occur to neighboring countries, but then people try to go to countries where they think they can have better living conditions. For these reasons, we see that many Syrians who fled their country due to the civil war try to migrate to neighboring countries like Turkey first, and then they try to go to Europe. Refuge is a difficult process not only for refugees but also for hosting countries, because these countries which accept refugees have to take different and various steps in order to maintain domestic peace and harmony. Japan's refugee history. We can say that Japan first met this word refugee in 1981. The event that caused Japan to meet this word is the Indo-Chinese crisis that took place in Southeast Asia. The emergence of Indo-Chinese refuge occurred in April 1975 when communists in Saigon defeated opposing forces in Vietnam. Those who opposed the new regime fled to Malaysia, Hong Kong, Indonesia, and the Philippines and other neighboring countries by sea with fear of life. Some groups of boatmen also sought refuge in Japan via the China Sea. With this crisis, refugees began to come to Japan. Then, according to the Refugee Convention created by the United Nations in 1951, it was requested to take steps towards refugees in hosting countries. Japan became one of the signatories of this treaty in 1981. With signing this treaty, Japan became an official refugee-accepting country. After these developments, Japan made changes in its policies and laws towards migrants and refugees. But Japan has never implemented a transparent policy against refugees. We can also understand this from the number of refugees accepted by Japan. Japan usually accepted the refugees at the beginning under the pressure of United Nations in accordance with the treaty it signed. To give a concrete example for this, in 2016, almost 10,000 people applied for refugee status in Japan. Only 28 of them were accepted as refugees. The number that USA accepted in the same year was almost 20,000. If someone looks at the numbers for Syrians, in 2015, Germany accepted 99% of them, while America accepted 94% and Australia 90%. Japan, on the other hand, accepted only 7 Syrians as refugees between 2011 and 2016. Japan's refugee acceptance rate by the number of applicants is only 1%, and compared to other G7 countries, Japan's refugee acceptance rate is 0.3%. So what is Japan's refugee policy like? To summarize briefly, Japan has a very strict refugee policy. We will talk about the reasons later, but if we look at the policy itself, the rate of refugees accepted by Japan compared to the number of applicants is only 1%. The policy, which was already strict from the beginning, is actually getting more and more strict. For example, after the death of a Nigerian from a hunger strike in a refugee camp in 2019, the Minister of Justice, who is in charge of refugee policy, set up a committee which submitted a proposal to the ministry to ban refugees from making a second application after being rejected once. It was even a proposal suggested that those who objected his removal from the country may be recognized as a criminal. Rejected applicants who refuse a deportation order would be transferred into the criminal system. With the law's revisions, asylum seekers could apply only twice before receiving a deportation order, and they can face with penalties upon refusal. Finally, the new amendment does not add a limit to the indefinite period of detention for asylum seekers who have been issued deportation orders, despite condemnation from the United Nations and from human rights groups. In 2019, Prime Minister Shinzo Abe introduced the law to accept more foreign workers to fill the gaps of aging workforce, but it failed to shift the government's approach toward refugees and asylum seekers. Although Japan earned some credit for liberalizing its policies, it actually tightened rules for refugees and asylum seekers, including cutting the rights of asylum seekers to work while their applications are under consideration. This strict policy of Japan has been criticized both in the international community and in the country by the opposition parties. Michihiro Ishibashi, a member of the Constitutional Democracy Party, criticizes the policy of the Abe government as follows. They are supposed to improve the immigration policy or refugee recognition schemes in Japan, but on the contrary, they are trying to make it more difficult. I'm personally very much ashamed that our refugee recognition is only 0.4%, means 20 or 30 people each year. We really need to take more responsibility for this. This situation of those staying in refugee camps in Japan is also bad. Asylum seekers are temporarily held in these camps, but there is no limit how long they stay in these camps. Asylum seekers whose applications are generally rejected are kept in camps as if they are prisoners. This attitude of Japan also receives a lot of reaction. These reactions come from both inside and outside of the country. We are talking about Japan's refugee policy, and so why is Japan so reluctant, unwilling to accept refugees? Before I talk about this subject, I want to talk about something other. Japan is one of the countries that donate the most to UNHCR in the world. On UNHCR's official website, Japan is identified as one of the biggest donors. Japan's aid in 2021 alone has already reached $125 million. The reason why Japan accepts fewer refugees can be grouped in under 3 main titles. 1. Japan is an island, is isolated country. Closest countries to Japan are only China, North and South Korea. So the countries that civil wars and problems occurred are far from Japan. It is not easy for people who is seeking refuge to go to Japan. Generally, people seeking refuge first go to the neighboring countries, and if they have enough chance and money, then they can go to Japan, but it's very difficult in practice. 2. Japan wants to preserve and protect its domestic peace and security. Japan thinks that refugees from outside may have problems for keeping domestic rules and order. Besides this, Japan wants to protect its ethnic homogenic structure. Those who live in Japan know this characteristic of Japan better. Despite being the third largest economy in the world and providing many technological and cultural elements to the world, Japan is still an isolated country. I think the biggest reason for this is that it's an island country and they have an inside policy of Japanese first. As a Japanese Prime Minister said in 1980s, one country, one culture and one race. Compared to many countries, Japan makes you feel better that you are far from your home. For example, if you don't have a Japanese friend who can be a guarantor for you, you should have a very good job, or your company must be a guarantor for you to rent a house in Tokyo. Japan has always concerns about trusting foreigners. Third, the third reason is that Japan wants to implement a refugee policy in line with its real definition. We said in the definition of the refugee that refugees are persons outside their countries of origin who are in need of international protection because of a serious threat to their life, physical integrity or freedom in their country of origin as a result of persecution, armed conflict, violence or serious public disorder. According to the Japanese law, in order for a person to be considered as a refugee, they must be direct target in their own country, and this situation must be up to date. In addition, the risks must continue in the future. In other words, Japan does not accept you as a refugee if you don't have a life-threatening risk in your own country in the future. This strict attitude of Japan causes many people who apply as refugees to receive negative feedback. Even applying as a refugee in Japan is a problem. You need to explain your situation as properly as they can understand you well. If your story is convincing to the officials, then you must prove your situation. It is not easy to prove either. You need to bring evidence of problems you have experienced in your home country. People who come as refugees generally cannot bring proof with them. Besides, there are many documents you need to fill out. You must fill these documents correctly. But people who come as asylum seekers are generally not equipped or skilled to fill out these documents themselves. They should definitely seek help from a lawyer or consultant. It is not over. After submitting your documents, a long evaluation process awaits you. This process can take up to years, and during this time you may stay at the camps. I would like to explain by two concrete examples how Japan evaluates the applications. Case 1, the person is not considered a refugee. In case 2, the person is considered a refugee. Let's look at the examples. Case 1, the case of one Syrian man. Arrived in Japan in 2012, application for refugee status was rejected and currently going through court procedures. Participated in demonstrations against the Assad government after witnessing innocent children being murdered. However, the Japanese government said, although it cannot be denied that there is the danger of being attacked during demonstrations, it's a problem that is shared by all people who participate in these demonstrations, and it is not a danger that is unique. So the decision was that refugees are those who are individually in danger, and Syrians who participate in demonstrations are all in danger, so are thus not refugees. Case 2, the case of one woman from Africa. Arrived in Japan in 2009. Following court procedures, was designated as a refugee in the autumn of 2016. In the beginning, the government rejected her claims on the basis that she was not in a leadership position. She was attacked when she was with her companions in the rejected opposition party and obtained a medical record from a hospital showing that she had miscarried as proof of her story. In the end, the Nagoya High Court decided that she was a refugee since she would be in a danger of her life if she went back to her home country, even if she wasn't in a leadership position. Taking into consideration the human rights situation in Uganda, where even general party members are arrested and suffer through violence, she won the fight. This was a groundbreaking case of victory. These two examples are taken from the official site of Japan Association for Refugees, Japan's largest NGO for refugees. As you can see, Japan is doing a refugee evaluation process that fits the very definition of refugee. But there are some reasons that justify Japan's strict investigations for refugee applications. There are applicants among asylum seekers who want to find a job in Japan and makes false statements during applications. They are actually economic migrants, but they apply as if they are refugee. If the officers understand the situation, the applicant will be deported. These false statements is one of the reasons for strict investigation. The percentage of those who passes the first investigation is about 7-8%. But after passing the first investigation, then you must submit your documents, proofs. So, what will Japan's policy towards refugees be in the future? Judging by the current attitude of Japan, I don't think that refugee policy will change much. Even people who has born in Japan cannot get permanent residence easily. It is not enough for a person to be born and raised in Japan to obtain Japanese citizenship. You have to be adopted by a Japanese family and you have to deny a second citizenship. And in 2015, when the government's Prime Minister Shinzo Abe was asked about accepting more refugees into the country, he said that we have citizens in our own country to take care of. First of all, we have to take care of our own citizens. However, Japan has recently been accepting temporary workers from other countries to meet its domestic labor needs. But these workers do not get permanent residence and they work with a temporary visa. Japan receives unskilled workers from other countries but not receives skilled workers like America or Germany do. The reason for this is to preserve some Japanese features like engineered in Japan, made by Japan. She fears that if she recruits skilled workers from other countries, that is, accepts the brain drain, some of the features that make Japan best will be lost. It is debatable how right this is, because migrants and refugees in developed countries are achieving great success. Even the founders of some of the global giant companies are migrants or refugees. Will Japan always be able to preserve these features? Or will Japan import brains from other countries like other developed countries? We don't know. To summarize. Japan has a very strict refugee policy. There are 3 reasons for this. 1. Japan is an island country and far from the countries in which there are civil wars, turmoils, etc. So it is not easy for refugees escaping from war to go an isolated island country. 2. Japan's desire to provide security and peace for the country and to preserve its ethnic homogeneity. 3. Willing to implement a refugee policy in line with its real definition. I don't know how long Japan can maintain its strict stance in the globalizing world, but I don't think Japan can hold out too long. I think that Japan, like other developed countries, can look at refugees a little more positively. I have come to the end of my video. Thank you for listening to me. I will try to share videos like this. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and like the video. Bye bye.